It was nearly midnight when Adam's car rolled into the narrow gravel driveway, headlights bouncing off the tall, skeletal trees that lined the edge of the woods. His new rental house stood just beyond them, tucked away like a forgotten relic. The place had been cheap, almost suspiciously so, but Adam had convinced himself it was worth it: peace, quiet, and the chance to finally write without the constant noise of the city. The realtor had warned him about the patchy power lines and poor cell reception, but Adam didn't care. At least, not yet. The house itself was 2 stories tall, with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. From a distance, it looked like every classic countryside home Adam had seen in films, except there was something slightly off about it. The windows were dark, almost too dark, reflecting no light even as his headlights swept across them. He killed the engine, and for the first time, noticed how crushingly silent it was here. No cars. No dogs barking. Not even crickets. It was as if the woods had swallowed every sound whole. He climbed out of the car, stretching his legs and pulling his coat tighter around him. The air smelled faintly metallic, mixed with the damp scent of wet leaves. When he grabbed his duffel bag from the trunk, the sound of the lid slamming echoed unnaturally loud, as if the forest itself had been listening. Adam paused, waiting to hear an answering sound: an owl, the wind, anything. Nothing came. The silence pressed down heavier. He told himself he was being paranoid and walked up the creaking steps to the porch. Inside, the house was cold. His flashlight beam cut through the shadows, revealing furniture covered in yellowing sheets, as though no one had lived here for years. Dust floated in the air, stirred by his movements. The floor groaned under his boots. He made his way into the living room, pulled the sheet off an old armchair, and sat down for a moment. A tired smile crossed his face. He had survived the stress of moving, and this house, eerie as it was, belonged to him for now. He tried to ignore the strange feeling that the air was heavier near the stairs, like the second floor was watching him. As he unpacked, Adam caught something faint from outside, a single crunch of leaves. He froze, flashlight hovering toward the window. Nothing moved. His heart thudded as he leaned closer, pressing his face to the glass. Just beyond the tree line, the darkness seemed thicker, almost shifting. He shook his head, laughed nervously, and told himself it was just his imagination playing tricks after a long drive. But before he pulled the curtains shut, he thought he saw it, a figure standing among the trees, pale and unmoving. When he blinked, it was gone. Aaron tried to steady his breathing as the road curved sharply to the right, the faint glow of the town's distant streetlights nowhere in sight. The muddy footprints he had seen still gnawed at his mind, and he couldn't shake the thought that someone, or something, was keeping pace with his car in the shadows. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel tighter. Each second dragged out painfully, and he found himself whispering under his breath, "Just a few more miles. Just a few more miles." He prayed silently that the lights of Mill Creek would appear before anything else did. Then, out of nowhere, the scraping sound returned. This time it wasn't along the outside of the car, it was coming from inside. Aaron's heart seized as his eyes flicked toward the dashboard. The noise echoed beneath the passenger seat, slow and deliberate, like fingernails dragging across metal. He tried to convince himself it was a loose piece of wiring or a forgotten tool rattling around, but when the sound shifted and climbed upward, directly beneath the passenger seat cushion, the illusion shattered. Every instinct screamed at him to stop the car, but the road stretched endlessly on with no safe place to pull over. His headlights caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror, the faint outline of a face peering at him from the back seat. Aaron's chest tightened as panic clawed through him. The shape was faint, just pale enough to catch his eye before disappearing into the darkness of the car's interior. He didn't dare turn around, his body rigid with fear. Instead, he pressed the accelerator, the speedometer needle rising, as if outrunning whatever had found its way inside the car. But the faster he drove, the colder the air became, until frost began forming along the edges of the windshield. A whisper broke through the silence. Not a thought in Aaron's head, not his imagination, but a voice, low, rasping, almost playful, emanating from the empty passenger seat. "Why are you in such a hurry?" His throat went dry, his entire body shaking as he struggled to process what he'd just heard. The voice lingered, curling around him like smoke, and then a faint pressure sank into the seat beside him, as if something invisible had settled in to ride along. Aaron's hands quivered violently, but he refused to take his eyes off the road. Finally, through the blur of terror, he saw it, the faint glow of Mill Creek's welcome sign up ahead. Relief washed over him for a fraction of a second before the voice returned, closer this time, almost at his ear. "We're not done." At that very moment, his car lurched violently to one side, as though someone had grabbed the wheel. The tires screeched against the pavement, and the vehicle nearly slammed into the trees before Aaron yanked it back under control. His chest heaved with terror as the glow of the sign drew nearer, but he realized the horrifying truth: whatever had joined him in that car didn't plan on letting him leave the silent road alive. Aaron's pulse hammered in his ears as the car surged toward the edge of Mill Creek. The faint glow of town lights in the distance felt like salvation, but the weight in the passenger seat made every second unbearable. The air reeked faintly of damp earth and rusted iron, and though he refused to turn his head, he felt the press of eyes watching him from the darkness. His fingers cramped against the wheel, slick with sweat. "Almost there," he whispered hoarsely, though the words did little to ground him. The voice came again, sharper this time. "You don't belong here." Aaron's breath hitched, his eyes darting to the frosted window as though the words had etched themselves across the glass. His vision blurred with panic, and for a fleeting moment, he considered bailing, throwing the car into park and running into the trees. But something deep inside warned him that stepping into that endless black forest would be far worse. He stayed glued to his seat, white-knuckled, praying that the road would finally end. Just as the welcome sign drew closer, his headlights flickered violently and then cut out completely, plunging him into pitch black. Aaron screamed and slammed the brakes, but the car didn't slow. It accelerated, engine roaring unnaturally, as though under someone else's control. The steering wheel wrenched in his grip, fighting against him, pulling the car toward the ditch. He strained with every ounce of strength, knuckles cracking as he fought to hold it straight. In the corner of his vision, the pale face in the back seat had grown clearer, its features sharp now, sunken eyes, a wide, toothless grin, and skin stretched thin as paper. The passenger seat groaned as the unseen weight shifted closer. Cold fingers brushed the back of his neck, and Aaron nearly lost control entirely. His mind screamed for him to give up, to let the car crash and end it all, but some stubborn spark of survival refused. With a guttural cry, he stomped the accelerator, forcing the car forward with everything it had left. For a breathless instant, the pale figure lunged forward, its grin widening as if it could taste his fear. Then, with a jolt so violent it nearly threw him through the windshield, the car burst back into light, street lamps. Houses. The quiet, sleeping town of Mill Creek stretched out ahead of him like a lifeline. The frost vanished from the windshield, the weight in the passenger seat disappeared, and the voice silenced. Aaron pulled into the first gas station he saw, chest heaving, heart trying to tear itself from his ribs. He stumbled out of the car, dropping to his knees on the asphalt, gasping as though he'd been drowning. But when he looked back at the car, his blood ran cold. Muddy footprints trailed across the hood, up to the windshield, and stopped right at the driver's side door. Aaron stayed slumped on the pavement, struggling to calm his breath. The gas station's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above him, grounding him in reality after the nightmare stretch of road. A clerk inside glanced up, concerned, but Aaron quickly forced himself back to his feet, wiping his trembling hands on his jeans. He told himself he was safe now, the silent road was behind him. Just a hallucination, just exhaustion. But when he turned back to his car, those muddy footprints still stared at him, stark against the hood, each one pressed deep into the metal as if something impossibly heavy had walked across it. inside the gas station, the clerk, a wiry man with tired eyes, watched Aaron with unease. "Rough night?" he asked casually, but the tone suggested something deeper, as though he already knew. Aaron tried to laugh it off, mumbling about long hours and bad roads, but his voice cracked. The clerk frowned, leaning closer. "You drove the forest road, didn't you?" The words froze Aaron in place. He hadn't mentioned where he'd come from. The clerk shook his head slowly, eyes darkening. "Shouldn't drive that stretch after midnight. People bring things back with them." Aaron's blood chilled. He wanted to demand answers, to force the man to explain, but his exhaustion and terror tangled his thoughts. Instead, he muttered a hasty thanks, grabbed a coffee, and left. The drive home through town was eerily uneventful. No scraping, no whispers, no frost. For the first time in hours, Aaron felt like he could breathe again. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the faint glow of dawn had begun painting the sky. He stumbled inside, collapsed onto the couch, and let sleep claim him almost instantly, but when he woke hours later, the nightmare wasn't over. The house was freezing, his breath visible in the morning light. The heater hummed, but no warmth came. Slowly, dreading what he already knew, Aaron turned his head toward the armchair across from him. The cushions were indented, sagging under a weight that wasn't there. And as his pulse began to race, the familiar rasping voice whispered from the emptiness, "I told you, we're not done." Aaron's scream echoed through the still house, muffled only by the sound of something unseen shifting in the chair, settling in as though it had found a new home. From that day forward, neighbors would occasionally see him through the windows, talking to someone who wasn't there, or hear him muttering late at night as frost coated the inside of his windows in the middle of summer. The silent road hadn't let him go, it had followed him home. The town of Mill Creek was small enough that rumors spread faster than wildfire. Everyone knew about the old, crumbling Victorian on Ashford Lane. Its shutters dangled loose, its porch sagged, and its paint had long since peeled away, leaving the house a skeletal relic of what it once was. Some swore they saw candlelight flicker in its windows late at night, though no one had lived there for decades. Others whispered about strange voices echoing from inside, low and mournful. It had become a dare among teenagers to step inside after dark, but few ever made it past the gate. Claire, a college student visiting her grandmother for the summer, had heard the story since childhood. Unlike most, she wasn't easily scared, she prided herself on being rational, logical. Ghosts were stories, nothing more. But one evening, when her cousin dared her to spend just 1 hour inside the house alone, she agreed without hesitation. With a flashlight and her phone, she set out toward Ashford Lane as the sun bled into the horizon. She told herself it would be nothing more than creaking wood, broken glass, and the stink of mold. The gate groaned as she pushed it open, the metal cold and damp beneath her fingers. The grass in the yard was overgrown, swallowing her shoes with each step. The air itself felt heavier here, as though the world had stopped moving just beyond the property line. When she reached the porch, she paused only for a moment before pushing the door open. It gave way with a splintering crack, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence that followed. Dust motes danced in her flashlight beam as she stepped inside. The house smelled of rot and mildew, its wallpaper peeling in strips that curled toward the floor. Furniture, draped in dusty sheets, stood like monuments to a forgotten family. Her footsteps echoed too sharply, bouncing unnaturally around the room. She tried to dismiss the prickling on the back of her neck as nerves, but her skin crawled as though unseen eyes followed her. Upstairs, a faint creak echoed, deliberate and slow, as if someone had shifted their weight to listen. She froze, heart stuttering. No animals had lived here for years, that's what everyone said. Claire swallowed hard, forcing a laugh. Old houses make noise, she whispered to herself. But the sound came again. This time it wasn't a creak, it was footsteps. Slow, steady, descending the staircase. Her flashlight trembled in her grip as she raised it toward the hall, the beam slicing through the dust-choked air. And there, at the bottom of the stairs, she saw it, a shadow darker than the dark itself, tall and human-shaped, standing perfectly still as though waiting for her to move. Claire's breath caught in her throat as the shadow loomed at the bottom of the stairs. Her flashlight beam wavered, cutting through the dust, but the shape remained fixed, tall and impossibly still. Logic screamed that it had to be her imagination, maybe the beam catching on warped wood or the angle of her light, but something deeper, primal, told her otherwise. Every instinct begged her to turn and run. Yet her pride, her need to prove herself, anchored her feet to the floor. She took a cautious step forward, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Hello? Is someone there?" The shadow didn't move. But the house did. A low groan shuddered through the walls, followed by the soft rustle of fabric, as if someone had brushed against the sheet-covered furniture behind her. Claire spun, the flashlight beam slicing wildly across the parlor, but the room was empty. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She turned back toward the stairs, only to find the shadow was no longer at the bottom. Her chest seized. The staircase stood empty, yet the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps continued, now descending the last few steps toward her. Her courage cracked. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a broken chair leg jutting from the floorboards. "This is stupid," she muttered to herself, voice trembling. She fumbled for her phone, raising the screen's glow as backup light, but the device flickered strangely, first dim, then blindingly bright, then dead black. Panic surged through her veins as the silence closed in again, thick and suffocating. Then came the whisper. Faint, raspy, like air escaping dry lungs, "You shouldn't be here." Claire's flashlight slipped from her sweaty grip, clattering against the wooden floor. The beam spun wildly before settling on the staircase again. And there, halfway down, she finally saw it. Not just a shadow, but the outline of a man, gaunt and twisted, his limbs slightly too long, his head tilted unnaturally to one side as though his neck had broken. His eyes, if they could be called that, glimmered faintly, pale against the hollow sockets of his face. Every muscle in Claire's body screamed at her to flee, but before she could move, the figure lifted one long, bony finger and pointed directly at her. The air around her dropped in temperature so sharply that frost began to form on the floorboards where she stood. Her chest tightened, and her breath fogged out in shaky bursts. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her throat. The figure's head snapped back with a sickening crack, and in an instant, the room was plunged into total darkness. The darkness was suffocating. Claire's flashlight lay useless on the floor, its beam smothered as though the batteries had been drained in an instant. She staggered backward, hands outstretched, heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. The silence was broken only by the sound of breathing, ragged, uneven, and not her own, coming from the base of the staircase. She couldn't see it anymore, but she knew it was there. The air carried the stench of damp soil and rot, thick enough to choke her. Her trembling fingers brushed against the wall, searching desperately for a door, a window, anything to escape. But the wood felt wrong, spongy, damp, pulsing faintly under her touch, like living flesh. She yanked her hand back with a strangled gasp. A sudden creak came from her left, and a cold draft slid across her neck. She spun in panic, raising her dead phone as if it could protect her. For a moment, the faint screen glow flickered back to life, and in that second she saw it. Right behind her, the figure towered over her, its pale face inches from hers. The skin along its jaw was torn and hanging, as if ripped away, exposing shadow where flesh should have been. Its eyes rolled back, leaving nothing but milky whites. Claire let out a scream, stumbling to the side as its hand shot out, grazing her arm. The touch burned, not with heat, but with an icy numbness that spread instantly through her skin, making her muscles seize. She collapsed against the wall, teeth chattering as frost bloomed across the wallpaper where its fingers had brushed. Adrenaline surged through her veins, snapping her survival instincts to life. She scrambled forward, forcing her legs to move despite the numbness. The front door was only steps away. She lunged toward it, throwing her full weight against the wood. But it didn't budge. The knob turned endlessly in her grasp, spinning without unlocking. Behind her, the entity's breath rattled closer, accompanied by the sound of wood groaning under its unnatural steps. It wasn't rushing, it didn't need to. It was enjoying her desperation. Claire spun, back against the door, and screamed, "What do you want from me?" Her voice echoed, shaking the walls. For the first time, the thing stopped moving. Its head snapped upright with an audible crack, its hollow eyes locking onto hers. Then it spoke, not with a whisper, but with a guttural voice that made the floorboards vibrate, "To be remembered." The lights in the house flickered violently, then died again, leaving her alone in the dark with it closing in. The words vibrated through the house, "To be remembered." Claire pressed herself harder against the front door, her chest heaving, her mind racing to make sense of it. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive with something ancient and angry, something that refused to be forgotten. She gripped the doorknob with numb fingers, twisting and pulling, but it spun endlessly, mocking her. Behind her, the thing's slow, deliberate steps resumed, the sound of cracking joints echoing across the rotting walls. Her instinct screamed at her to run, not away from the door, but deeper into the house. She bolted to the left, flashlight forgotten, her phone flickering weakly in her hand. The hallway stretched longer than she remembered, warped and endless, as though the house itself was twisting her path. She burst into what must have been a dining room. The table, covered in a moldy sheet, loomed like a corpse on a slab. Frost traced across its surface as she stumbled past. A cabinet door swung open on its own, slamming into the wall with a deafening crack. The air grew heavier with every step, pressing down on her chest until she could barely breathe. She felt the entity close behind, its presence cold, suffocating, its movements deliberate, patient. Then she saw it, a back door, crooked but still intact. Relief surged through her veins as she hurled herself toward it. She grabbed the handle, yanked hard, and froze. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass panel in the door. Only it wasn't her. The reflection smiled, its lips peeling back too wide, its eyes pale and lifeless. Slowly, it lifted its finger and pointed behind her. Claire spun just as the figure lunged. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, its face contorted into that ghastly grin. She screamed, grabbing the nearest object, a rusted iron candlestick from the sideboard, and swung with everything she had. The blow connected with a sickening crunch, sending the figure staggering back. It didn't bleed. Instead, the shadow peeled and tore like smoke ripped apart by wind. For the first time, it recoiled, its hiss rattling the glass in the windows. Seizing the chance, Claire rammed her shoulder into the back door. Wood splintered, the frame groaning. The air outside rushed in, warm compared to the freezing death that clung to the house. With one final cry, she threw herself through the opening, crashing onto the overgrown grass outside. Gasping, she scrambled to her feet, running until the house was a shrinking silhouette in the distance. Only when she collapsed on the sidewalk beneath the safety of the street lamps did she dare to look back. The windows of the house glowed faintly, like watching eyes, and for the briefest moment, a pale face pressed against the glass, still smiling. Claire's lungs burned as she sat beneath the street lamp, clutching her scraped arms, staring back at the house she'd just escaped. It stood silently on Ashford Lane, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. The windows were black again, no sign of the pale face she thought she'd seen. Her rational mind screamed that exhaustion and fear had tricked her senses, but her trembling body knew the truth. She had touched it, fought it, felt its icy grip on her skin. The bruises already spreading along her arm weren't imagined. When she finally staggered home, her grandmother found her on the porch just as dawn was breaking. The older woman gasped at her pale, frozen skin, wrapping her in a blanket and demanding answers. But when Claire tried to explain, her grandmother's face drained of all color. "I told you never to go near that house," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It doesn't just hold the dead, it makes sure they're never forgotten." Claire pressed her, but her grandmother refused to say more, only muttering prayers under her breath. That night, Claire lay awake in her childhood bedroom, the covers pulled tight around her. The summer air should have been warm, but the cold lingered, sinking deep into her bones. She dozed off in fits, jolting awake each time she thought she heard the creak of footsteps outside her door. At one point, she swore she saw her breath fog in the air, though the house's vents were silent. But the worst moment came near dawn. She rolled onto her side and froze. The indentation on her mattress beside her was unmistakable, like someone had lain down next to her during the night. The following days only confirmed her fear. No matter where she went, in her grandmother's kitchen, walking through town, even riding the bus, she felt eyes on her. Shadows seemed darker where she stood, stretching longer than they should. More than once, she glimpsed her reflection in a store window and saw that same too-wide smile looking back at her, even though her lips were pressed tight in fear. Whatever haunted the house had not stayed behind. It had followed her into the world beyond Ashford Lane. Claire's cousin never teased her again about ghost stories. In fact, no one in town did, because word spread quickly that Claire had gone inside the Ashford house and come back marked. Some swore they heard whispers whenever she walked past, others claimed the air around her grew colder. And years later, when the house was finally torn down, townsfolk still swore that on certain nights, a tall, gaunt figure could be seen lingering near the street lamp on Ashford Lane, waiting, watching, making sure the memory lived on. Mill Creek was the kind of place where history wasn't written in books, it lingered in the walls, in the woods, in the whispers of its people. To outsiders, it was quaint, sleepy, even forgettable. But those who lived there knew better. They knew about the silent road where Aaron had nearly lost his life. They knew about the Ashford house that Claire had barely escaped. And they knew, though few would say it aloud, that the town itself seemed to keep its ghosts alive, unwilling to let its horrors fade with time. The third tale belonged to the old mill at the river's edge, abandoned for decades yet still standing tall, its rusted machinery groaning in the wind. Teenagers dared one another to break in, but most refused after hearing the stories. Some said they saw faces in the shattered windows. Others claimed the sound of grinding gears echoed long into the night, though the mill's power had been cut years ago. The bravest who entered always returned pale, shaken, and unwilling to speak of what they'd seen. The unluckiest never came back at all. Marcus, a local mechanic, didn't believe in the town's ghost stories. When his younger brother vanished after sneaking into the mill on a dare, Marcus swore he'd uncover the truth. Armed with a lantern and a crowbar, he pushed through the rotting doors one summer evening. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and rust, though no machine had run in years. The silence was broken only by the faint drip of water and the occasional clang of loose metal. Then, as Marcus ventured deeper, the grinding began. Low, steady, mechanical, like gears turning somewhere in the shadows. As the lantern light flickered, Marcus saw movement. Not the shuffle of rodents or the sway of broken chains, something larger, something deliberate. He followed the sound to the central floor, where the great mill wheel loomed. That's where he found them, impressions of hands smeared across the rusted steel, dozens of them, all fresh, as if pressed there moments before. And among the prints was something worse. A message, scrawled in oil-black streaks: Mill Creek remembers. What tied Aaron, Claire, and Marcus together wasn't just bad luck or fear, it was the town itself. Mill Creek fed on memory, on whispers, on terror. It was a place where the past didn't die, where tragedies replayed themselves again and again, attaching to anyone unlucky enough to stumble too close. And so the stories continued, of the road, of the house, of the mill. 3 tales among countless others, carried on the wind like warnings. Yet the warnings never worked. Because Mill Creek knew one truth above all others: so long as someone remembered, the horror would live on.